This is Breighlynn Polk interviewing Marty Foglia for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is currently 9:12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. This interview is being recorded at the WHCJ radio station located at Savannah State University in Savannah, Georgia. Can you first start off by telling me your full name and your role at the WHCJ radio station?
I'm Marty Foglia. I'm the consulting engineer for the station. Long time.
Perfect. Can you tell me how long you've been at the station?
Started in September of 1980. But there's a lot goes after that. A lot of things happened since then. So I think I'm probably the longest term person involved with the radio station at this point.
Yeah, it's coming on like 44 years now. Is that?
Yeah, that's right, man.
Time flies when you're having fun. Absolutely. So I just want to kind of go into your background before you kind of got into the station, talk about your early childhood and experiences like that. So would you be able to describe the places where you grew up or where you were raised?
Yeah, I grew up in Huntington, Long Island, New York. My dad was an engineer as well for ABC Radio, and moved on to work for the network in New York City. For about 38, 40 years, he worked for the World of Sports as an engineer. And so I used to go to work with him quite a bit as I was growing up, from my earliest memories on up through graduation. So he was a big influence on what I did, because he actually wanted me to start at the university to be a veterinarian. But I quickly decided that was not for me, and went ahead and decided to go into engineering instead.
Thank you for that. So you say you were raised in Long Island, correct?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how that was growing up? I know we are in Savannah now, so.
Yeah, it was, where I grew up was very country. It wasn't like you think of New York or New York City. It was way out on Long Island. And when I was growing up there, it was mostly farms around us, and it quickly grew to become quite a large town. The school, we had a very small group of school kids I went to school with from the time we were in kindergarten all the way up through graduation. I think our graduating class was only 200 people. So I wasn't used to big city life. Oh, we lost our lights. That's because they were on a...
It's emotional. Hold on, let me
These are on a kind of a timer.
Is it the motion thing?
Yeah.
Let's see. Try.
Are you okay like that, or can we?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, then we can go on.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Where was I?
You were saying that it was a small graduating class?
Yeah, small grade. So I was used to a small town atmosphere for the most part, and it's not changed a lot. I went back for my 50-year reunion last year, and a lot of it's the same.
Thank you. So what was your childhood like? Did you have certain experiences that stood out to you as a child growing up in that community?
Yeah, interesting story. I didn't really realize I had any talent for this kind of thing until I was about 6 years old. I had to get my tonsils removed. Back then you stayed in the hospital for a couple of days after they did that. And my dad knew I was kind of an antsy kind of kid, so my dad knew I would be, kind of restless with nothing to do for a couple of days. So he brought me in a bag an old wind-up alarm clock that didn't work. It was broken and in pieces, and a little small tool set, and gave me something to keep my mind active and my hands busy. And I ended up taking the thing apart, fixing it, putting it back together again, and it worked fine. And when they came to pick me up, and I showed them, that the clock worked again, they were just shocked about that. Like, how does this 6-year-old kid do this? But it was just a measure of, I've always been kind of a logical person, so to me that was kind of the start of me realizing that, I can do things that, other people don't necessarily do at my age. So it was from that point on that I kind of consider myself kind of a fix-up guy.
Yeah, so was it something that you seen your father do, like fix things that you kind of caught on to? Or?
One thing my dad was very good at was he had a good work ethic. And growing up, although we did well, I lived in a nice neighborhood, and we didn't want for much. But he was the kind of guy who would never say no to any project. He was, I'm afraid to say, a lot more interesting than I was, because he produced, engineered, and managed two rock groups back in the late 50s, early 60s that were fairly successful. A lot of people are into music, know the name of the Viscounts and the Criterions. Were an old group, and he would add additions onto the house. It seemed like there was nothing he couldn't do. He would just, if he didn't know how to do it, he'd learn how to do it. And he owned racehorses for a while. He started a heating business after he retired. He was just the kind of a guy. He always was looking for another edge somewhere. And he worked for Alan Freed as the audio engineer. Alan Freed was, of course, the father of rock and roll, and was a real interesting guy. I remember taking him one time to my a contract radio station I had, and the owner of the station was very well known. His name was Jerry Rogers, very well known in Savannah, and had been around a long time, been in business a long time, done a lot of things. My dad and he sat around for 2 hours talking while I was working on the radio station, and my dad left, go back to New York, and I came back a week later, and Jerry sat me down. He says, your dad and I had a great conversation. He's a very interesting man. He's done a lot of things. He said to me, he looked at me in the eye, he said, he must be very disappointed in you, meaning that my dad had done so many things. He reached out in so many areas that Jerry was impressed with that and considered me not having done a whole lot with my life, just becoming an engineer, no big deal. But I went to the State University of New York, SUNY at Farmingdale, and became an engineer. Got my first job as an engineer in Orlando in 1977. And worked there for 3 years, kind of cutting my teeth in the broadcast business. And they promoted me to become a chief engineer here in Savannah once the company I worked for bought some properties. And I came up here to build those properties out. I did that and decided I wanted to go on my own. And that's when, in 1980 is when I really started building my business. And this was one of my first contracts was here at Savannah State.
And what's the name of that business?
Sorry?
What's the name of that business?
Electronic Engineering Enterprises.
Got it. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
So can you tell me the era that you came up in Long Island? Like what was the years approximately?
Let's see. Well, I was born in 54, and we moved to Long Island in 59.
Okay.
And I started school in kindergarten, a little school called Washington Drive Elementary School. What I said before was that I went to school with the same kids from that kindergarten class right on through. Of course, they built new schools. Huntington grew tremendously as far as population, and the same kids came along from one school to the next through graduation. I had a few good friends growing up in the neighborhood. We did a lot of crazy things together, built a lot of bombs, and as kids, you do stupid things. I built, with my buddies, we built go-karts. We experimented with all kinds of vehicles that we could get killed in. But it was always a matter of keeping your hands busy. We didn't have the things that kids have today. We had our minds and our hands could be dangerous weapons back then, because whatever your imagination could come up with, that's what you'd do. So it was a good life growing up in New York.
Now, did you spearhead those projects since you said you've been a fixer-upper since the age of 6? So did you kind of head those things of fixing cars?
No, not so. I mean, I certainly done my share of car work. When I turned 17, I got my first car, and I was totally responsible for it. Any repairs, gas, anything it needed, I had to provide. So that meant working. I would throw newspapers. I would cut grass. I would anything I could to make a few bucks. And so that included me buying tools and stuff to work on my car. So I learned a lot about that kind of mechanics early on. And I just never said no. If I could break down a tire and replace it on a rim, I would do it. Whatever it took. Take a carburetor apart, rebuild it, put it back in again. Whatever I had to do to survive and keep on moving forward.
Now, is that something that you still do now, as far as
No.
you got away from it?
I'm glad other people do that kind of stuff now.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a lot of manual labor that goes into that.
I could still do a lot of things, but now these cars have become too complicated.
Yeah, you have electric cars now.
Yeah,
the world is changing for sure. So you talked about your dad a lot and this influence that he had on you. What was your family structure like out with you? Yeah.
I have 4 sisters and a brother. Mm-hmm. My folks got divorced when I was 17, and my dad still continued to work in New York until he retired and moved down to Florida. My mom's still alive. She lives in New York, still in the same house, and she's 94 years old, but still drives and gets herself around, takes care of herself. My dad passed away, should be 3 years in June.
Sorry to hear that.
And his wife, my stepmom, they were married a long time. She passed away a few months later. I have my sister and her brother still living up on Long Island, and I have my one sister I have in South Florida, another one in Jacksonville, and another one in Colorado.
Okay, so you're kind of spread out a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, but we still get together. We're planning a trip to go back to New York and see Mom here in a couple of months.
Yeah, that's good that your mom is also able to, care for herself since y'all.
Oh yeah, she's sharp as a tack. Her memory's better than mine. It's just incredible.
I had an aunt like that. She transitioned last year, but up until the time she transitioned, she can tell you everything about, from when she was 5 years old. So.
That's a good word, because my dad went through that transition. He was 90 when he started going through that transition, and it was kind of sad, to see, because he was such a brilliant guy and so active and sharp, but it happens.
Age catches up with you sometimes. Yeah. Do you mind me asking your parents' names?
Yeah, my mom's name is Josephine Barker. Now she remarried, and her husband passed about 12 years ago. And my dad's name is Martin as well as mine. And I have his dad's name was Martin, and I have a son named Martin.
Okay, so it's 4 generations.
Yeah, we try to keep it going.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my son had a son, but didn't name him Martin.
He said it was enough. He had to stop the
I guess so.
cycle. Yeah. So, are you the oldest?
No, I'm third down.
My
sister Joanne is the oldest. She's 73.
Okay.
And then my dad's my sister Rosemary. She's 71, almost 72, and I just turned 70.
Oh, happy
Thank
late
you.
birthday. So how did it feel? You say you had 4 sisters?
Yes.
How did it feel to have so many women in your family?
The 2 youngest, my youngest sister and my youngest brother, kind of grew up without me because I was old enough where I was out of the house when I was 18 and going off to college and all. But my 2 oldest sisters and my next youngest sister, my sister Gina, is just 3 years younger than me. We were pretty close. We remember a lot of the same things together, whereas the 2 youngest siblings don't really share the same memories. It's kind of a different household, a different environment. But yeah, we're all close, and we're still close.
That's good. So you graduated high school. Where did you go to high school?
Harbor Fields School District, and it started at Washington Drive Elementary School. Then they built a new school called Little Plains. That was the new elementary school. From Little Plains, we went to a junior high school called Oldfield. And Oldfield, we stayed in it through 9th grade, which is unusual because high school starts 9th grade in most places. Mm-hmm. And then, so for 10th, 11th, 12th grade, we went to a new high school, Harbor Fields High School.
Okay. And is that school still standing?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, the funny thing about Little Plains, I took my wife up to New York with me, and I said, "This is where I went to school, Little Plains." And it turned out it was they changed it to a special needs school. And so she looked around, she could see that that's what it was. They renamed it and everything. And I said, well, it wasn't like that when I was going to school here. I promise you.
Yeah, things have definitely changed. I've seen that before, where schools upgrade and turn into something alternative than what it was there for
Exactly,
before. Yeah. So you graduated high school, and then you said you went to SUNY?
Went to, yes, at Farmingdale.
Okay.
Went there, engineering. Actually started to become a veterinarian, but changed that after the first semester. I said, no, not for me. But I already excelled in science and math, so I was able to clep out of a lot of classes and started immediately into, high-level calculus.
Gotcha. So what was it exactly that made you realize that veterinarian?
Biochemistry.
Yeah. Do it.
And you had to be strong in that, unfortunately. I said, no, it's not for, I barely passed the class, and I said, that's not for me.
So then, was it something, I know you said that you had always been interested in, like, engineering and fixing things, so is that what made you gear toward going into
Sort of, yeah. It was actually, I was at a kind of a standstill. I consulted with my dad. I said, I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to be a veterinarian. And he said, well, why don't we start a restaurant together? I always wanted to do that. I said, no, Dad, I don't think I want to do that. I love eating out, but I don't think I want to be the owner of a restaurant. And then his third choice was, how about engineering? Mm-hmm. I thought about it for a minute. I said, you know what? That might have some merit. And so he sent me a bunch of engineering books. I guess some that he'd used. And I looked through them and I said, yeah, I can do this. In fact, And the funny thing is, I haven't worked a day since. Everything I've done has been engineering related, and I've always felt like I can do this for the rest of my life. And so far I am.
Which is, you seem like you're on the right path with that. Yeah. Did you always know that you wanted to do the type of engineering that you're doing? I know it can fall into a variety of categories when you say engineering.
I'm an electrical engineer, and my dad was too, but he shifted over to audio engineering early on, and I was thinking about it. I was actually applying for jobs as an electrical engineer with various companies. I think it was Comcast at one point, or whatever it was back then, the electric company and places like that. But when I was looking, they weren't looking for a lot of engineers. I had to actually move away from New York to get my first engineering job. And it was when I started applying in radio, like my dad had been in, that I started getting some responses. But the weird thing is, they wanted me to. These were small stations that wanted me to be a DJ and an engineer, and I was responsive. No, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm an engineer, and that's what I want to do. And so I finally got an offer from a fairly large group of stations down in Orlando, Florida. I interviewed, and they hired me, and I was the assistant chief engineer at that point. And I guess I kind of proved my mettle early on, because the chief engineer got sick. He had to go in the hospital, and he was gone for a while, and there were emergencies cropped up, and I was able to handle them without any problem. And they knew right away that I was meant for a little bigger things than just being an assistant engineer at that station. So when they bought some properties in Savannah, the station manager offered me a job as chief engineer and to build them out. And so that's what I came here to do, and been here ever since.
So how was it in Orlando compared to moving to Macon?
I'll tell you, it was a big shock. I mean, Orlando was a big, bustling and fast-growing city. A lot of things going on, a lot of tourism, and although that was 40 years ago, it was still big even then. Now it's huge. I can't go back there. But coming to Savannah was kind of just starting to climb out of a hole. And I didn't really want to be in Savannah. I just took it as a stepping stone. Savannah, to me, when I ever passed through, it kind of smelled, and it wasn't the cleanest place, and didn't have a lot to offer. But I figured I could build this out, put it on my resume, and I'll be fine. And Savannah grew, and it grew on me. The first few years, I thought, well, let me get through this, and the company's going to move me up the ladder, but that never happened. And that's when I decided to go out on my own and start my own engineering. Things started coming along. I got this contract for that state. I got Georgia Southern University. I got a little AM radio station that Ben Tucker owned back then, WSOK, and things started generating. It wasn't but for after a few years, I said, you know what, I can make a living doing this instead of working full time for one station. I can, expand out. So I was able to take the one station I had as a full time employee, and they were one of my early contracts as well.
So how was that process of going from working for a company to creating your own business?
It was not scary for me. I kind of felt I was going in the right direction, but when I brought that news home to my wife, she said her first response was, "Well, you mean you're not going to have a job?" She was of the job mentality, and her whole family was. They worked jobs, and I said, "No, this is actually going to work out better than a job." And it turned out it did. It grew rapidly, very rapidly. I didn't realize what a need there was for independent contractors out there. As it turns out, it is kind of a dying field. I'm one of the few engineers in the state of Georgia, even that it does this, does everything from IT to RF to audio. Most engineers now are more specialized in one field, IT or RF, which is radio frequency engineering, like transmitters and so forth, or audio. So it's a dying breed. They're not bringing them up like they used to.
I'm sure, especially with the advancement of technology and things.
Yeah,
like
exactly. You had to embrace every change and become proficient at it. Starting with computers when I saw that coming. That was in the 80s, and I started really getting into that and developing my skills there.
So you got to see the transition of everything from then to now.
From tapes to digital, yeah.
What would you say is your favorite, I guess, well, first before I ask that, because for someone like me, I'm trained as a historian.
Mm-hmm.
So for someone unfamiliar with the electrical engineering process, can you give me like a rundown of what your day-to-day may look like or some of the things you do?
These days, there's so much digital going on. Look at this station. I converted this station to digital like 3 years ago, and it was one of my early projects of this size. I've done this before, but much smaller. had to build 5 studios here, all digital. Replace the transmitter with a digital transmitter, all HD, and so my daily routine is mostly just keeping up, making sure that all the paths are right. When you're talking in a computer or digital domain, a lot of it depends on pathways, IP addresses, and keeping track of all that. So day to day, I go around and I just make sure everything's performing like it's supposed to. That's at the studios. And at the transmitter sites, you've got a different situation altogether because there's still a lot of tube transmitters out there, and they're all high power. So you have to be able to troubleshoot and foresee any potential issues with those transmitters in particular. They're a little more finicky than the solid state transmitters that we have. Putting a lot of those in these days as well. But even those takes a bit of maintenance to keep them going and keeping track of all the parameters around those. And as far as audio goes, you see microphones around you. There's no more tape machines like there used to be. My routine would include aligning tape heads, checking the speed of record players, turntables, cleaning that type of equipment. Back then, there was a lot of smoking going on in studios, and so there was that kind of maintenance. It was just to keep things working. You had to do a lot. You had to have your hands in a lot of stuff. There would also be maintenance periods where the FCC would let you shut down for like one night a week, and that would usually be Sunday night, Monday morning. And early on, that's what I would do. Sunday night, shut down stations, check all the transmitters out and equipment out, and get them back up and running again before sign on. And that was true here too. They used to sign off every night at midnight, sign back on at 5 a.m. And so if I had to do any work to transmitters and anything that might take them off the air, that was the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. And that brings up the question I was going to ask before. Out of the processes that you've worked with, do you think that digital is easier than what it was before you started to do the transmitting?
If you're talking about transmitters and audio, yeah, I'd say so. But if you're talking about tape machines and tube transmitters, no,
Mm-hmm.
no. There's a lot more detail goes into installing something like this, a digital console. The wiring is not as intensive with it, but the setup is much more intensive. All computer based. You've got thousands of T's to cross and I's, to dot when you're doing something as intricate as a digital studio. It's not just point-to-point wiring like it was with the old analog stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see how there can be pros and cons in that process.
Yeah.
Adjusting. So, what were some of your earliest memories of radio? I know you said your father did a lot of work with audio engineering and electrical engineering, but what were some of your first memories of radio, whether it be as a child or...
As a child, I remember my first memories of my dad being involved in broadcasting. I guess I was probably about maybe 3 or 4 years old, and he worked for ABC Radio back then. But like I said, he was always active, always very busy. So he also did audio engineering for Dick Clark for the American Bandstand, whenever they had their studios in New Jersey at that time. And I remember seeing him on TV. I remember him being on the radio. They used him as a character at one point. And I remember hearing his name on the radio, and that they called him the Beeper for some reason. I don't know why. And so that was a character that they introduced a long time ago. And but that was my early memories. And I remember him being interviewed when Alan Freed died, and he was interviewed on, I think it was ABC TV did it back then, because he had worked for Alan Freed and they interviewed him. But I was really young then, so those just really vague memories, but I remember them. I remember that happening.
I'm pretty sure that was interesting as a kid to see.
Yeah, it didn't mean much to me back then. It was just, hey, that's my dad, no big deal. But I look back now and I think, he was very accomplished, and he really got out there. Of course, being in New York and New York City, the paths were much wider there than they are.
So was there a reason why it was hard to find jobs in engineering in New York by the time you were applying, that it was different from when your dad was working?
Mostly, well, in those back then, you're talking about the mid 70s. There was a real depressed market for getting a job for anything, really. And so it was, I had to fill out a lot of application forms and send a lot of resumes out before I even got any bites. And like I said, they were looking for combination people because they were trying to save money and fill a couple of roles. Mostly these were smaller stations. It wasn't until I got to bigger markets and give them those a chance that things started to happen. And I was very grateful to get my first engineering job because, of course, that led me to where I am now. But yeah, it was difficult. I knew I was going to have to move away from New York in order to find what I was looking for.
Yeah. Well, happy that you were able to find something, especially you making that change from veterinary to engineer.
Yeah.
Had to make sure you had something to show for it. So, so your first job in radio was what exactly?
My first job, assistant engineer at WHOO in Orlando, Florida.
And how was that?
I loved it. I couldn't sleep. I was so excited about it. And in the beginning, they had me doing silly things. I don't know whether they were testing me or not, but I painted. I repaired fences. I cut the grass. As assistant engineer, I did whatever I could because I wanted to get my foot in the door. And I didn't mind it. I really didn't. I said, you know what? I've worked harder than this before. They started out at really low pay. And there I was, married, had a little child and trying to make ends meet. It was tough, but I worked repairing equipment for a pawn shop to make extra money. pawn shop had a lot of equipment that didn't work. Back then, people would sell their stereo systems and 8-track players and cassette decks and to make some money, and sometimes they didn't work. And so he'd pile them up and leave them for me, and I'd grab them up, take them to my little shop in my house, and fix them, return them with a little tag on them, how much he owed me for, and he'd pay me, and I was able to buy groceries, So it was, I did what I had to do to make ends meet and continue to do the job I wanted. And eventually it led into more of a electronic and electrical kind of work once I saw I could actually handle doing the job. But even then, I didn't mind it at all. It kept me busy and made me enough money, and I was in the career path I was looking for.
And were you there for 3 years? Was that the job where you were there till 1980?
Yeah, just about 3 years.
Okay.
And that's when they bought 2 stations here in Savannah. It was 94.1 and 1290 AM. And I was to design and build new studio facilities for the stations. At that time they were part of WTOC TV, which then the TV station split off the AM and FM. So I came in. That's what I did. It took me a year to get it designed and built out, but it was after all that I realized maybe there's a better path for me than just sitting around here cleaning tape heads and adjusting reel-to-reel machines. And so then I started expanding and found this and other clients as well needing help.
In the station that you worked for, did you have any interest in the type of music they played there, or was it just strictly like what you were there for, to do the job? Just
the job, just the engineering. Mm-hmm. That's really ever wanted to get involved with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said you didn't want to be a DJ when they were trying to offer it.
No, I got a little involved in promotions because they would have department head meetings and you had to come up with ideas and all, and so I did get a little involved with some of the promotional ideas and remote broadcasts and things like that. But that was just part of being an employee of a radio station as opposed to being an independent contractor. Things change a lot when you move away from being an employee. Actually, it lets you get involved with more detail, engineering-wise, and not being distracted with other things like building a remote booth or setting up remote equipment, things of that nature that were, they could have other people do.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a particular training process that you had to follow when you first got that job, or was it just?
No, it was, I had to get licensed by the federal government to do what I do. And then, but in engineering school, you don't learn about radio. You learn all of the things you need to know to put the puzzle together. And so it was learn as you go. It was being logical about things, being able to troubleshoot and come up with solutions was probably the biggest thing I had to learn. It wasn't just sitting down and fixing something. Yeah, it was learned. There was no training process or thing. Now there have been times where I've had to go to get some additional education when automation started becoming a big thing. I had to go off and learn more about the IT end of that and how to set up and maintain, install automation systems. And as it turns out, they pay me a big thing. Everybody's doing automation now. There was a time I had to redesign a directional AM array, which is very complicated. But by that was 10 years after engineering school, so I'd become pretty rusty with that kind of calculus. So I went back to actually to what's Georgia Southern now. It was back then it was Armstrong, and I took a couple of classes back into advanced calculus, so I could. We didn't have the kind of programs we have now to do that kind of work. You had to do kind of things longhand, and so there's been some continuing education, but nothing that's really been required. Mm-hmm. Just things to help you work solutions better.
And I guess that's a good skill that, y'all didn't learn how to work in a particular field when going to school for engineering, so you can be, adaptable to any,
Exactly.
especially with the technology and everything changing so rapidly.
Very rapidly, especially now.
Absolutely. So how did you get involved here at WACJ?
When I got started here, there was an engineer who actually worked for Savannah Communications. He actually owned Savannah Communications. And he'd been taking care of his 10-watt radio station here since the early to mid-'70s. And he was just too busy for that. He called me one day and he said, "Look, Marty, I can't do this anymore. It's just a little thing." He said, you might want to see about it. And so I came here and I met with Carol Gordon, who was the manager back then. Of course, she did other things too. She worked for WTOC TV. And so I got started. It was not much to do. 10 watts is not much of a radio station, but it had a console. It had, reel-to-reel machines and cart decks and things of that nature. So there was stuff for me to do, and I'd come here once a week and just check things out. It got to a point where 10 watts just wasn't cutting it, and I saw that there was an opportunity to increase power. So we applied and got an increase to 1,000 watts from 10 watts. That was a big step. A new transmitter, some new processing equipment and all that, and that went real well. I bought a 1,500-watt transmitter. We were using 1,000 watts, and we were working out of the old dormitory over here. I think it was called was the Williams Building back then. I think it was. Anyway, it was a woman's dormitory, and I remember because I'd have to work early in the morning because of my shift I was still working full time for the radio station. So I'd come here early in the morning, and I had a key to the building. I'd go in and I'd check things out. I can't tell you how many times I would surprise women walking down the hallway with next to nothing on, going to the bathroom or something, But, I just, they didn't seem to mind. I'd just go into the station and do what I had to do. And then later on, we were able to increase power to a 6,000-watt station, which is Class A, and got a new transmitter, and that's what we have. We have one of them right now here, but at the time we had to install it in that old building, and the antenna was on a water tower. That's not even there anymore. The water tower was removed, and it worked that way for a number of years before this facility, this building was shared with administration and the radio station. We had just a couple of studios, and we were able to use that back room. I reinstalled the transmitter. And we stayed that way for a long time. That old transmitter still works as a backup. And I check it every time I come here. I check and make sure it still works, and it works great. But we did put in a new solid-state transmitter a few years ago, and it's been the main transmitter. So that's pretty much the history. Then we eventually took over the whole building, and I was able to build out these studios, then eventually upgrade them to digital.
Yeah, and the studios look nice.
Yeah, these are very nice. Actually, this is pretty much cutting edge as radio goes these days.
Yeah, no, I've visited a couple schools, radio stations, and this one very stands out. So
it's the best, right?
Yeah.
Say it's the best.
Yeah, it's the best so far I've seen. Absolutely. So you came here in 1980 as well?
1979.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was 1980 that I took over this after I was pretty much into designing and building out the other stations that I was employed to do. This came along just shortly after that.
Okay, so as far as this station is concerned, how would you compare this station to other stations that you work for?
This one's actually one of the better equipped stations. Now, I've done a lot of these, and there's still a lot of analog out there that's still in really good shape. So, I can't say this is the best I've got, but this is right at the top. Because Savannah State's been very, very good about maintaining the technology and moving with it and not fighting it or, trying to hold back and save money. There's always been some really good programs that have come along and Ike was extremely helpful in getting all of this done. Of course, Ike and Grace worked together very closely in getting these projects done. So she learned a lot from him and was able to continue the process. She's responsible for all this digital equipment that's in here, with the work she did in getting Title III grants and other sources of revenue.
Yes, it seems like it was a collective effort to make sure that the station lived on. So I know some radio stations at HBCUs, they get defunded.
Yes, yeah, it's unfortunate. This station's got a big following, fortunately, so it's still very, very vital and important in the community.
So whenever it changed from a 10-watt station to a 1,000-watt station, how was the community response to that, being able to?
I can't really speak for that.
Okay.
That's something Ike would probably know better.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the coverage increased tremendously,
Mm-hmm.
and it was doing. They were one of the few stations doing any jazz back then, and so the jazz community really embraced it. At one point I had a full-time assistant, and he was a jazz enthusiast. In fact, he played saxophone, and he knew Ben Tucker. In fact, I think he knew Ike Carter too. And so he said the only station he'd listen to was Savannah State because of the jazz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that a lot of, especially with HBCU radio stations, they make sure that they have at least a gospel and a jazz component
Yes.
within their setup for the
Mm-hmm.
schedule. So that's interesting. Thank you for that. Now, I know that this is an HBCU radio station. Did you see any differences between this being the HBCU college radio station and commercial radio stations that you probably work with?
Let's just say commercial stations are more bottom line oriented. Obviously, they employ salespeople and a big push on sales and promoting the station for sales purposes. In the case of the non-commercials like this one, the focus is more on the community and the product, the music, and if they generate any revenue as a result of their programming, well, that's basically gravy. But a lot of the stations that are non-commercial are like Christian-oriented or to that extent, and they're all supported by the listeners. This is supported by listeners to some extent, but I think mostly it's grants and things of that nature that keep it going. Mm-hmm. So there's the difference between there's difference between different kinds of non-commercial stations. The commercial ones are all pretty much the same. They're all generating revenue to stay on the air, and their programming is important, but they live and die by the ratings. Mm-hmm. Whereas a station like this, you just assume it's going to have its same listeners, and you're not really worried about, how it charted. It's going to continue to do well as long as you're providing what the community is looking for.
Now, how long has WHCJ been in operation? Do you know? I know you said you came here in '79.
I think they started as a 10-watt station in '75.
Okay.
If I remember right. And Georgia Southern was about the same. Georgia Southern did the same thing, 10 watts. I brought them up pretty much the same way, mm-hmm. From 10 watts to 1,000 watts, and they're still at 1,000 watts. They haven't been able to upgrade from that. We were very fortunate here in a city the size of Savannah to upgrade several times to get the kind of power level we have now.
Now, what is the process of upgrading a station from 10 watts to 1,000?
Well, first there's what's called a feasibility study. Mm-hmm. You study to see that you can fit something of a higher power in the area you're looking for. In this case, we needed to stay on campus because we needed to, didn't have towers around here that we could simply build or move to. Once you find a facility study shows that there's an opening, then you you expand the study to include how much power can be applied in that same area and not interfere with other stations on adjacent channels or co-adjacent channels. And so once you prove all that out to the FCC, then you apply to them for a construction permit to build that facility at those specifications, and then they give you 18 months to build it. You build it out, you apply to them once again for a license saying, okay, we built it, here's the proof that it works, and then they issue a license. Then later on, I found that I had a client in Beaufort, South Carolina, that wanted to increase their feasibility study. Came back fine. It turns out it was a adjacent channel to what this frequency was back then, and so I had to apply to the FCC to change the frequency of the station. I think it was 88.3 at the time, and the station that wanted upgrading in Beaufort was at 88.7. And so they were too close and they weren't going to work. So I applied to the FCC for a simultaneous increase in power between these two stations. This one would change frequency to 90.3. The other one would stay at 88.7. And the station in Beaufort helped fund all the research and engineering had to be done to get that through the FCC. Well, it all came through fine, except that this station had to go. I had to design a directional antenna so that they would not interfere with 88.7 in Beaufort. And so I did all that, designed it out, sent it into the FCC, proved that it would work, and they allowed me to apply here for a new license for 90.3. And so it all had to come together at the same time, and it did. I was able to get them a new transmitter there, a new transmitter here, increase power for both stations, and everyone was happy.
Now, as far as I know we talking watts, but is there a certain mile radius whenever it increased that it went from 10 to 1,000?
Yeah, there's a lot of variables in there. People think, well, you go 10 times or 100 times the power, you're going to get that. No, it doesn't work that way. Power is a square of the distance, if that makes any sense. It's you. If you increase the power, let's say you increase power 50%. You're only getting in about 10 or 15% more coverage. So by increasing from 1,000 to 6,000 watts, they covered from, let's say, 10 watts, let's say 1,000 watts covered maybe 20 miles at the most. Now you're covering maybe 25 miles to 30 miles. But the density of that signal was drastically improved. So now you're getting inside buildings where you didn't get before, even though you can carry it in the car. Inside buildings has always been an issue with lower power stations. Mm-hmm. Of course, you're always looking for the highest you can put your antenna, and then that is also something that has to be applied for. The FAA controls all that, and so now you're dealing not only with the FCC, but you're dealing with the FAA, and you're having to make it all come together. And I did a lot of projects like that. Sometimes you got to deal with the Department of Engineering, with the Army. You're having to deal with EPA. Mm-hmm. A lot of things come into play when you start building towers and changing antenna heights and creating radiation.
Yeah, with the environment.
Yeah, that you make sure people are protected from, and it gets pretty involved, but it's all just part of the job.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. How long did it take y'all to go from the original 10-watt station to now 6,000? How long was that process?
Let's see, 87. It probably took about, I don't know, maybe 10 years. Mm-hmm. The total process of the three upgrades, antenna, building a tower, all that stuff. It took a lot of time because there were other things going on at the same time. There was something called the 8990 docket that the FCC put forth that allowed stations that were low power, like 1,000-watt stations, to increase power to 6,000 watts. 6,000-watt stations to increase power to 25,000 watts. And so there was a lot of competition for that spectrum. And so you had to act quickly. You had to look ahead and make sure I was doing the best thing for my clients, that I always gave them the opportunity to increase if I saw something was available. Some did, some didn't. The ones who did benefited, like this station and several others, and then there were those who just sat back and said, "No, I'm happy with what I got," and that's where they are today.
Now, are you a solo team when it comes to working, or do you have employees that work?
No, I don't have any employees. Actually, I'm able to contract out what I need. Mm-hmm. I have tower crews. I have IT guys if I need them. Mostly I do all the work into myself. If I got to pull cables or do things that I can't really do very well, mm-hmm. I have people I can hire for that kind of work. So never really needed employees. Like I said, I had a full-time employee one time for 5 years, and I trained him, and he learned well. He was smart. He went to college, and after 5 years, when I could finally leave him alone on a project, he went to work for Colonial Oil, and I made much more money, and headed up his own department. I decided, you know what, I don't want to go through that again. So I was able to do everything myself.
Now, I know you say you did some work with Georgia Southern as well. Did you see any differences between Georgia Southern and Savannah State University? I think Georgia Southern is not an HBCU.
Yeah, Georgia Southern was run by a student activity fund. That's where their money came from. There wasn't a lot of money, but they were able to get things going, whereas Savannah State was always part of the communication arts department, I guess. So here they have a full-time employee or two, the director, so-called manager, an assistant director, whereas it's Georgia Southern, basically run by the students with a supervising professor. And that professor would get involved as far as improvements went, spending extra money, things of that nature. But the students ran it, and that was good and bad. It was good because they had the freedom to do whatever they wanted for the most part within FCC regulations. But it became kind of a party central in a lot of cases back in the 80s. It wasn't until I upgraded their facility up at Georgia Southern. They took some ceiling tiles down, and it was full of beer cans. So there was a lot going on that we didn't know about. But there was a lot of interest. There were easily 70-plus students that wanted to be in the radio. They wanted to be on the radio. And we'd have huge meetings, for me to go over how to take meter readings, how to do this, how to do that, what their responsibilities were, what they couldn't do. Whereas here, you had volunteers that worked that had other jobs. They were adults for the most part. They were responsible adults. A totally different environment. Georgia Southern is doing fine. I mean, they're not a student activity fund anymore. The communication arts department took them over, but they're still run by the students for the most part. But not nearly as many people are involved now as there used to be. Same as here. There used to be a lot more volunteers and students wanting to work here than there are now. But it's just the sign of the times. That's just how things go.
And did you see a particular historic component here at WHCJ with I know you said most of the hosts or volunteers were adults, so did you find that they brought a more historical component to the radio station that the students didn't at Georgia Southern?
Noting the format, audio, the music format, yeah. Certainly they, jazz and gospel and the other programming that they put on here involves, I believe, a more mature person to appreciate it. Whereas Georgia Southern, they're kids, and they're doing what they want to do. They're playing their music, and it's not real traditional stuff. It's whatever's happening at the time. And I think more of the students at Georgia Southern are getting involved in a little older music now because they're realizing that that's a standard that they can always count on. Whereas the music that's newer these days, it's kind of fickle, kind of moves around. Whereas here these are standards they're playing here, and you know what to expect when you tune in WHCJ.
Now, would you say, as far as the community here, do you know the audience that WHCJ kind of appeals to at all?
It's kind of hard to say because even though it's part of the university system and part of the community, it still has a fairly low profile. Whereas a commercial station, in order to, to maintain what they've got, has got to maintain a higher community profile. But that's all from a commercial standpoint. Excuse me. I don't need water. My voice gets tired after a while. Where was I going with that? The community plays a big part, and the kind of people who listen to the station programming plays a big part in that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, what I'll say about I'm not really into the end of what the audience looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem. Just curious. So let's see. Did you work in any other industry outside of radio, or has it only strictly been like radio broadcasting that you worked in?
It depends on what when I was going to school, I was working, but had nothing to do with broadcasting.
Were you like any involvement with film or TV or anything?
I've done TV. I built a TV studio here.
Okay.
Back about maybe 15 years ago when things were still analog.
Yeah. Now, is that TV station still in operation?
It's still in operation, but it's all digital now.
Okay.
And when it converted over, I wasn't involved with that.
Okay.
But I've also did one for Georgia Southern about the same time, and that's all been converted now to digital as well.
Was it a hard process between doing the process for radio compared to TV?
Yeah, it's a lot different. In TV, of course, you're dealing with two different aspects, visual and audio, whereas here we're just audio. TV transmitters, for example, also they're dual transmitters, video and audio. Here we're just audio. The transition in TV to digital and HD came much quicker than the conversion from radio to digital and HD. But they're a lot different in some ways and same in others.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Now, being here at Savannah State University, was there any impression that you had of HBCUs before you got here? I know you were in New York, so I'm not sure if you knew what an HBCU was before you got here, or
Were you saying
historically black college or university?
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't know anything about that.
No, you just knew it was like
in fact, this is the first time I've heard of that term
really?
before.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So HBCU means historically black college or university, which
Okay.
Savannah State is. It's a state school, but it's also a historically black college. So
Right.
Wasn't sure if you. I know in New York they don't have any there. So
No.
usually a Southern thing.
That's right. I guess so.
Yeah. I know some people, especially when it's a state school, they don't realize that it kind of falls into that category. So I was just curious. But yeah, it seems like you did a lot of work to maintain the culture of HBCU radio, even though you probably did it without realizing that was what you were doing. Especially in the culture of HBCU radio stations, like I said, being defunded, and even now the schools are being defunded, so losing accreditation and things like that. So I'm sure this radio station is a reason why they want to continue that culture of keeping it alive. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It allows us to be here and doing this type of work as well.
I'll tell you, I'm glad to be here. Every day I thank God for this station and all the others that put a lot of faith in me.
Mm-hmm. So where was it? The workers here very welcoming to you whenever you came on board?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's because we're so hard to find these days. Almost everywhere I go, every station I go to, it's like they're so relieved to have somebody who can do this, take care of their problems.
Yeah, because that's what Grace was saying yesterday, that by FCC law, you can't be in operation unless you have an engineer working, or you'll get fined. So
well, you have to have an engineer, of a status that they approve of, taking care of the facility. You can't just have any jackleg coming along and saying, "Yeah, I can do that," when they really can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So were there any type of natural disasters that happened between your time here in Savannah that made your job kind of?
Yeah, the first big one, when I first came here, Hurricane David had just come through, and it pretty much devastated Savannah. Most stations were off the air, but I was just coming here just to get started in what I was doing. I didn't even have the tools or anything I needed to help anything out. I just had to kind of wait until things got to a point where I could start working on them. But then things just stayed pretty quiet from weather and disasters of that kind until Hugo came along in late 80s, 89 I think it was. That was a big problem. That was a lot of work trying to keep stations on the air. There was flooding. There was power outages. There were a lot of things to deal with that I learned a lot from. To that point, it was simply maintenance, but now it's having to rebuild salvage, things I'd never had to do before. And so that kind of led me into another direction where, I could handle disasters. And then there was a lot of call for engineers of my nature to travel around to help other, like in the Gulf area where storms hit quite a bit. So that happened. And, we've had others come along that really haven't done much. We had Floyd come through. It was supposed to level Savannah. Never did. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with the history of Savannah and their weather. But Floyd was a huge storm that fortunately didn't hit us here. Some of the worst storms that came through that caused more trouble were ones that came across the state. We had Irma, we had Matthew, and those did damage. We had built an infrastructure that could handle it better by that time. And so, although the FCC has incorporated some new programs to deal with disasters, we fortunately hadn't had anything major to report, in those programs.
Okay. And how would you compare, I know this is a little bit different, but with the pandemic, was there any type of adjustments that you had to make as far as, this being like not a natural disaster, but it was definitely a...
Oh, you turned on the lights with your hands. That didn't affect me so much. Okay. I still did everything I needed to do. It's just that there wasn't anybody at the stations. They were all working remotely. And so that introduced a new thing that I'd never had to do before, and that was to set up remote operations for DJs, announcers to be able to work from home, setting up VPNs, virtual private networks. And so that it was a small learning curve, but it was still a little bit different than I was used to.
Now, did you have to take any additional educational courses to learn how to build those things?
No, pretty much what I already knew and just expanding on it a little bit.
So it's just so interesting to me that you said you had to create like these operations for them to be able to work remotely. Did you use a particular program for that, or was it something that you just like already knew?
It was done a couple of different ways. Are you familiar with an FTP? Okay. Some were done with FTPs where people could record from home, send it from an FTP. FTP would then grab it and insert it into the automation system. We're at a point where that's just so easy to do these days. Others were set up to do remote broadcasting with certain software that would interface through a network back to the radio station, a VPN, which gave them access to the site as if they were there. And that was probably used more than any other way. And that stayed that way for almost a year before people started coming back to work and being able to feel safe in the environment.
Did it take you a while to figure that process out, or?
I immediately knew that was where we were going to go with it.
Okay.
I knew that people weren't going to be able to. Things were being shut down. All businesses, you couldn't be around other people. What it was like, and that wasn't going to work in the broadcast industry. They had to keep things going. The show goes on.
Yeah, that's the thing about COVID that it did. It had to show everybody like we can't just pause and take a standstill. We got to keep everything moving. So, yeah. Good to, like I said, you had all those skills coming up to make you able to adjust and adapt to the different changes. So that's good. Now, I know we were backtracking a little bit, but you talked about your family in the beginning. So you had a son, you had a wife.
Yeah, I've got 7 kids, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, ranging from age 50 to 24.
Okay. Now, do any of your kids, did they follow in your footsteps, kind of how you did with your dad, or?
Not my son. My son Martin comes close to anything. He's in IT.
Okay.
And that's what he likes to do. Although he's got a good aptitude, I think if I had to, I could probably get him trained into doing a lot of the work I do because so much of it involves IT work. But yeah, my youngest son, he's a chef. That's what he wanted to do, so that's what he's doing.
Using his hands still.
Yeah, but that's like I like being a chef too. I cook. I'm a great cook, as a matter of fact.
That's good. And are your kids in the Savannah area, or are they spread out?
Not far. My son and another daughter live in Brooklet, and I have a daughter in Guyton, two and one in Pooler. Make track them all, and two of them are still going to university. They're going to Georgia Southern, the two youngest ones.
Okay, so it's pretty close
Yeah.
nearby. Yeah, pretty sure. So as far as I know, you said you did radio, you did some TV stuff. Have you ever worked in film or?
I was actually I was an extra in the Conspirator movie with Robert Redford was the director, and what's her name? Sean Penn's previous wife. She was in it. John McAvoy was in it. John Long was in it. Anyway, I was an extra. I was in the hangman scene of the movie, and that's about as close to film as I've ever been.
Now, so you just said you were extra. You didn't do any type of like audio work or anything.
No,
Okay.
no, I wasn't. I wasn't involved in the technical end of it. Just in the acting end of it, I guess.
Did you enjoy that at least?
I did. I did for 2 days. Yeah, I got paid $200.
Yes, I went to school in Atlanta, so they would always be recruiting extras
Cast calls and all,
stuff.
yeah.
So I did a few casting calls and like just being an extra, doing what I would usually do, be a student on campus because they would be filming on campus, and that helped me with groceries for like a good.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about that movie was I was in the mall and there was a cast call, and I saw this long line of people. Like, what is this all about? And so I asked somebody, said, well, it's a cast call from a movie that they're going to be doing. And so I found a friend I knew, and I was talking to him, and line moving up. And I said, well, she said, well, why don't you just see what they have to say about you? So I got up, I got interviewed, and they said, we need a picture of you. And the only picture I had was a picture of me and my new grandbaby, and it was in my car. And so I said, I'll be right back. I ran up to my car, got up, right back. I said, that's fine. And then they ended up calling me and told me to grow a beard. And that I could be in the movie, and I was going to be in the movie in a couple of months. So I had 2 months to grow a beard, and it was awful looking. It was terrible.
But I mean, granted, with the movie, the setting of the movie, I mean, it makes sense why you would have to have a beard and not be so cleanly shaved.
I looked period, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Robert Redford, he said, "Don't call me Mr. Redford, call me Bobby," because I'd have to ask him a question. He would set us up. He wanted us to, to act and react, and. That was it. I'd love to do it again, but kind of time gets in the way now. I do more golf than anything else, I guess.
Absolutely makes sense. So, just going back with your jobs in radio, were there any particular genres of music that you work with for the radio stations? I know this is, like you said, jazz, gospel, it's a mix. But
I can appreciate a lot of music. I'm a rocker, though.
Okay.
I have to say. I've never been into jazz much. I can listen to it, Not much into country music. But, and I have to say I do listen to oldies.
Yeah, I know you say your dad, he managed rock bands coming up, so I'm sure you had a big influence of rock.
It was, I was really young when that all faded away because, like he said, the Viscounts and the Criterions, once they had a little taste of success, they started arguing and they fell apart. And he couldn't do anything to keep them together. But they came up with a couple of songs that were charted, and he did well with that.
Now, do you consider yourself to be a mentor to others who are coming up and want to pursue careers in electrical or audio engineering? Or
yeah, funny you should ask that. They actually had a meeting here a year ago or so where they tried to take some engineering students and see how they felt about broadcasting and broadcast engineering. I don't know that it ever went anywhere, though. But no, can't say that I've had anybody come up to me and say, hey, I want to do what you do. I actually did. I can take that back. I did one person, and I said, well, go back to school, get yourself an engineering degree, and we can talk. And that was the end of that.
Yeah. Some people kind of get intimidated, I'm sure, when they try to go into
they think it looks easy. There's nothing to it. No, there's a lot to it.
Yeah, maths and the sciences of it all. Absolutely. So, let's see. What is it about this station that's important to you personally? I know you've been here for almost 45 years.
Yeah.
So, but outside of the history that you have here, what is something that...
I've never seen a more dedicated group of people than I've seen come and go here. From the students on through the faculty and the administration. And so I always felt they took it seriously. This was not This is not something they just were doing on the side. This is something they took seriously, and for that reason, I stay dedicated too. I said, well, they're serious about it. I am too, and saw upgrades come along. I saw, they were seriously considering making things better, and that impressed me. And so I'm not going to say that like Georgia Southern didn't do that, or my other clients did, but this always. And it was so close to me, too. It was nearby. It wasn't anything I had to travel far to do. It fit into my schedule. And so I stayed with it. They were willing to keep me going, and I was willing to keep them going.
Yeah, I'm sure they appreciate that as well. Was there anyone when you came in who you considered to be a mentor, even if they didn't work in engineering, just to kind of teach you about
Ike? Yeah, Ike, definitely an inspiration. I've never seen anybody get more done than he did, and especially when the going got tough. He's a tough guy, and he made sure that he made everybody know that.
Now, how long did y'all work together?
Ike? Oh, well, we still work together to some extent. It wasn't until Grace took over. We worked very closely together. Every project. So yeah, he was a good guy, very well suited for this kind of work.
I'm sure he probably made the job easier to come into too.
Oh, yeah.
Working with someone who you consider
probably
more than just a coworker.
Absolutely.
So, do you see yourself working here for, I would say, another 45 years? Being funny, but how long do you think?
I've decided I'm not going to retire.
Okay.
I've decided as long as people need me, I'm gonna do it. I mean, I'm in good shape. I feel healthy. My brain still works pretty good. My hands still work good. I don't have arthritis. So as long as I can do all that, I can still see and think, I think I'll keep doing this.
So you could do it for another 45 years,
Sure, good Lord willing.
Yeah, then you say, your mom was sharp up until, she still is. So I'm pretty sure, I think that's kind of hereditary when you have.
Well.
Sometimes.
Yeah, hopefully I'll stay that way. You never know, though.
Yeah, times are changing. So I know that you mentioned you didn't even realize that it was an HBCU, but the name of this project is called the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. So why do you think that initiatives or what we're doing here is important?
That's a kind of a new term for me. So I think it's important, not only from a historical standpoint for the black community, but in broadcasting, I think it's even more important. I would hate to see, radio and broadcasting the pie has gotten cut up to smaller pieces is what's happened. And so now you have everything from podcasts to streaming, radio stations to terrestrial. You got Pandora, and you've got all kinds of ways to listen to entertainment. Historically, I think radio is going to have to survive because think about what happens in a power failure or when you lose your internet, or how are you going to communicate? How are you going to get information? And really terrestrial radio is the only way you're going to get that. It might be AM, but it's probably going to be FM. You're not going to get things over the internet. How many times have you lost your cell phone or not had it available to you, or lost the internet, or been in a power failure? You can always count on radio. And so from a historical standpoint, I think radio needs to survive, and in the black community it does too. I think it's an important way that community gets information and entertainment.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, I bought a crank radio just so I can have it for emergency purposes about a month ago. So, like you said, I grew up with my great-grandmother, and she didn't believe in listening to anything else but the radio for getting information, 8 a.m. for sure.
First thing in the morning.
First thing in the morning.
That's right.
And then,
I still do it. Every morning I turn the radio on.
And so, like you said, it is so rather people think of it as old school, but I think it's definitely necessary when it comes to knowing the history of how far we come with podcasting. And also, I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of radio because podcasting is so widespread.
Yeah, with young people especially, it's a shame. But like my youngest daughter, what do you listen to? And She listens to Spotify and streaming audio and all that, and that's fine. I said, "When was the last time you listened to the radio?" Well, I don't ever listen to the radio. It's sad that young people don't experience radio in the way we all did as a primary source of information. Well, I said, how do you learn about new music that's coming out or I get it from the internet. So there's a lot of eggs in that basket, and it's a shame. But I think with the right kind of promotion and profile in the community, radio has it's going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, it can't go anywhere. It's been here for so long.
Yeah, really.
And it's also the foundation for a lot of the things that are being podcasting and streaming and things like that. I think that you would need radio in order to have the later.
I heard an interview one time with this fellow who bought a newspaper chain, and they said, "Why are you buying newspaper when it's such a dinosaur?" He says, "Well, it's a dinosaur, right? But it took a dinosaur a long time to die out."
Yeah, so it's definitely going to be the same thing with radio, even though people consider it a dinosaur. Absolutely. So, what would you consider to be your proudest accomplishment working here at WHCJ?
Oh, this showplace. I mean, this was one of the largest digital projects I've done to date, and I'm proud to take people and show them, this place, what I've done, what has changed from analog to digital. I mean, I could take you back into the engineering room back there and show you what kind of wiring was required for analog as opposed to what's required now for digital. There's no comparison. So a lot of stations who have not upgraded yet to any kind of digital, if I can show them something like this, and it opens their mind up as to what they do. The thing that scares them is the cost for doing this. It's expensive. It's definitely not cheap. Nothing in broadcasting is inexpensive, from repairs, maintenance to parts and supplies. It's a very you get into big markets like Atlanta or New York, and that's nothing for them to spend $1 million on a project. Whereas here, I think this whole everything we've done here probably cost $1 million over the years. Is a big deal. So.
And it looks very good. So it seems like you got the most bang for your buck as far as
this
setting
is
everything up.
Really good.
Yeah, it is. So we come on a little bit to the close. Is there anything else that was not mentioned in this interview that you want to add before we close? Anyone you want to shout out or anything?
No, I think I owe a lot to my start in radio, having given the opportunity to come in, with green as I was, but with a lot of basic knowledge. The chief engineer of the first station I worked for, he took a chance in hiring me. I didn't know anything, and he saw potential, I guess, I didn't know I even had. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the people I've known in the industry through the years who some have come and gone. That's what happens as you get older. Some are still in the business. Bill Stakelin, who I believe is still in the business, was the first manager I ever worked for in radio. And he's the one who saw in me the ability to move up and move along. If it wasn't for him, I probably would not be where I am today. And all the people in that first radio station in Orlando kind of helped develop me to what I am coming up into here.
Thank you. And for anyone who is coming, up after you, working in audio and electrical engineering, what advice would you give them?
Never say no unless I said never say no to anything, any project. I don't think I've said no to anybody yet. I'll get a call from someone in Atlanta wanting me to come and take care of their. Now I could easily say, no, it's too far away. I'm not going to go. For some reason, I can't say no. Don't say no. Take on the project. Expand your mind. Don't feel you're limited. I mean, you got to know your limitations, obviously, but if you feel like you can do it, do it. you do nothing but grow from it.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Even if you fail, I've never feared failing. It only makes you better.
It's a learning opportunity for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, there's not anything else that you want to add to this interview, Mr. Foglia. I thank you again for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Nope. Hope I didn't dribble too much on the microphone.
No, you did perfectly fine. And I can let you know that the HBCU Radio Preservation Project, it was happy to spend this time with you on today.
Good, no problem.
Thank you again.